Sometimes it's just easier to do a project yourself.
But if you're the only church creative that can be counted on, you'll be severely limited.
That means you need others. And to make it work, you'll need policy.
We call it the Rulebook for leading creative church departments, and we're here to share it with you.
Let's dive in. Well, hey there, and welcome to the Pro Church Tool Show. We're here to help you and your church navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm Brady Shearer, your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. We call him the Mustache Minister. It's Alexander Mills.
Hello.
So I just returned from my trip to the Baltic states.
Home.
Great to be home. We visited Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and the non-Baltic state, but separated by a 60-minute ferry ride, so you might as well go anyway, Finland. And we had this meetup that was organized by a woman named Hannah in Estonia, in their capital, Tallinn. There were 12 different churches that showed up,
Awesome.
4 different denominations. There was a Christian radio station, a TV channel. So it was really cool.
All the Christians showed up to see Brady Shearer.
There was a 3-hour event where there was some Q&A, and then there was breakouts. And what I did was I got to go to each individual table, and we did some Q&A with a small group of that individual church. So I met one of the tables, and the 3 women there are talking about how their church is under 10 years old, newer church, mostly young families. I was like, oh, what an exciting time to be in a church. And they were like, yes, but we have hit this aggravating, irritating point where we, the social media and creative team, are trying to do things, but we keep running into this other person, a gentleman of some creative persuasion, was my understanding. And no matter what we do, he'll say, well, actually, it's no good for these reasons. And there was this paralysis at the table because I was saying, okay, what do we want to work on? And they're like, well, it's just a lot. And I was like, okay. So I kept working backwards. Tell me about your church. Okay. Tell me about where you are. Tell me about where you want to go. And what we eventually landed on was ultimately there is interpersonal conflict within this creative ministry that is preventing anything from being done. And it's so ironic because we will have these episodes every single week where we talk about tactics and strategies, what's working in churches, what's not working in churches. And in a vacuum, in a perfect world, the application would be, great, we learn the thing and we do it.
I'd love to do that thing, Brady.
But then there are other people.
Yes.
And they need convincing, they need empathy, they need collaboration, because we can't do everything on our own. And so what we're going to discuss here are a trio of different steps that we can take, the rule book for creative church departments. We're going to start with the emergency mode. This is what I talked with this table. I said, okay, we have a few minutes together. We can't establish an entire creative policy. So this is the emergency mode. Start here. Then we're going to move to basic mode. Once you get past emergency, okay, this is good. We'll get to advanced mode. Really, this should just be titled ideal mode. This is where we want to get to.
Right,
There are exact strategies and policies and values and rules that you can copy, and we'll go in that order.
So shall we start with the emergency mode?
The emergency mode. So what I said to this church, these 3 leaders, was, okay, you're working on a creative project, and another person on the team says, either I disagree with this project and its trajectory, or I disagree with the creative execution of this project. I said, what do you do? They said, well, I like what I like, and they like what they like, so we're screwed.
And so here I am at this breakout looking for what Brady Shearer has to say so I can bring that back to the table.
So I said the emergency mode that we can do right away, and I did tell them that ideally we get to a place of policy. I said, in light of that not existing.
Yeah, you're stuck.
Right, because the idea is you put the policy in place, you install it, everyone agrees to it, and then weeks and or months later, days, hours, when a conflict arises, you go, okay, great, this is fine. We all agree to this policy. The policy will be what determines how we move forward, because that's what we want, right? Let's say Alex wants to do something and I want to do something. It shouldn't come down to who has seniority.
Right.
It shouldn't come down to who can argue their creative idea better.
That's right.
It should come down to what creative solution better serves the church's mission. And so this is the emergency mode that I told this church. Right now, you have no policy. It's a tough spot. But what you do have, almost certainly, is some mission for why your church exists.
Right.
And perhaps you have it clearly articulated, written down somewhere, or perhaps it's more of an abstract idea. But nonetheless, your church has a reason for existing. So establish what that is, and then the conversation becomes, my creative execution of this idea, I believe, serves this mission because of this. Or I believe this creative idea existing at all serves the church's mission in this way. And then the other person has the ability to have a conversation and they can present their belief, assuming it's antithetical to yours.
Yeah.
The analogy is this. I said, the reason we're just sitting at this table and we're having a conversation about, like, what do we even do next? And every other table was like, we want to do this, or we're having trouble with this. And this table was like, I just don't even know where to start. Is because it's like we're all in a car. There's the four of us. There's the three of you and this other mysterious person. And we can't even decide where we're trying to get to on this journey.
Right.
So, like, of course, we can't turn the ignition.
Yeah, it's not just how to get there. It's like literally, where are we going?
Right. I said, the emergency mode is we need to decide where we're going. Once we've agreed upon that destination, now we can have a conversation of how we're going to get there.
Well, and that's a perfect analogy because once you decide where you're going, there are many ways to get there. There are direct routes to get to any destination, and there are scenic routes. You know, you put those up against each other as one is efficient and one is beautiful. And it's like, well, then once you discern where you're going, you can decide, well, do we have a lot of time? Or do we want to enjoy the process? Because then we can take the scenic route. But if we're strapped on time, let's take the direct route. That's how you work backwards from the goal. And so anchoring this to the church's mission and vision, when you're stuck and you need, like, you're in emergency mode and you need to make movement. If you don't have pre-existing policy, if you're a young church that doesn't have pre-existing policy, anchoring it to your church's mission and vision, which certainly already exists, like you said, Braid, whether it's like articulated on the wall or on the website, wherever, or if it's kind of just unspoken, that's a way to get unstuck. It's like, okay, let's take a step back from each other, from this situation for a moment, recognize that this church exists for a reason. And so let's hold this predicament up against this mission that we have agreed on just by being here, just by belonging to this church. We can get to sussing out formal policy for these decisions later on, but for now, we just need to move forward on this one thing.
Let's work through an example. So you might be asking, okay, what do you mean by mission? Truthfully, there are actually a number of different articulations of why your church exists that could serve as this line of delineation or this true north on the compass. There could be purpose, mission, vision, values. We did an episode on this in the past on church brand strategy. Purpose is why we exist. Mission is what we do. Vision is where we're going. Values are how we behave. So here's an example of a church mission statement. It's very, very broad. So if you have nothing, your church could probably take this, make a few tweaks if you want, and install it right away. Our mission is to create a welcoming environment where individuals can encounter God, grow in their faith, and engage in meaningful relationships. Through worship, discipleship, outreach, and service, we strive to reflect Christ's love to Tallinn and beyond.
Love it.
If you don't live in Tallinn, replace it with
swap that out. Yeah.
Saratoga Springs, whatever it is. So if I was going to make a case for my creative project, let's imagine that I'm on the social team. I want to do a post where we set up a phone and we tape a piece of paper on the back of the phone.
Right, we've talked about this in a recent episode.
Right, and the prompt says, like, show us how excited you are for church this morning. And we just hit record for the 15 minutes before service begins. And we record people on the phone, doing their happy dance. We cut it up into this montage that we post on social media.
And I'm a curmudgeon who says, I don't think that's good strategy for our page.
Right, exactly. So what I would say at this point, because I've talked about my preference, and Pastor Alex, the curmudgeon that he almost always is, has talked about his personal preference. What I would do is I would come to this discussion table and say, look, in our mission, we talk about being a welcoming church and creating a welcoming environment. My belief is that this type of post illustrates how welcoming we are. If someone lands on our social page and they say, oh, okay, what's this church all about? And they see this post, what does it immediately tell them? It's show, don't tell. We're not describing our church. We're demonstrating that we actually are what we say and have set out to be. We are a welcoming place. That is so much more compelling and convincing of an argument than, well, actually a lot of churches are doing this.
That's right.
Or Alex's position, which is like, this is like a little too trendy. This like doesn't feel like us, but without any description as to why.
Yes.
You can't just say like, this doesn't feel like us. It's like when you talk with designers and the person who is leading the project says like, I just need it to pop more. I just need it to pop. And you're like, well, no, I hear you. Right. But like, what does that actually mean? So that's a good example of this. Now, that's the emergency mode. Yes. So if you are dealing with something right away and you're like, well, I don't have time to install policy. I got to work through this conflict right now. the church exists for a reason. So that policy technically already exists. Right. You may not have used these types of words, but you can. Let's move next to the basic mode. This is where we reach the limits of the emergency mode, where we're getting into more nuanced conversations where something as broad as being a welcoming church doesn't necessarily serve us in solving the disagreement between two parties. So the basic mode moves us from church mission as our policy to the ministry mission as the policy. So now we're looking at establishing mission for the creative ministry itself, which would be an offshoot of the church's ministry mission, but more specific. So here's what I wrote down for a creative department's mission. Quote, our mission is to use creative expression to glorify God, inspire worship, and communicate his truth with excellence and authenticity. Through media, music, design, and the arts, we aim to create environments where people can encounter God and be drawn into deeper relationship with him and one another. So you can see how this is connected to the church's mission. For example, the church's mission talks about through worship. In here, we write it as inspire worship.
Right.
So if we were talking about a creative project and why we want to pursue it, we could describe it and defend it through the lens of this will help inspire worship, as an example. And now we have even more nuanced, more specific language to talk about creative problems. Some other keywords that I think showed up here, excellence and authenticity.
That's good.
I really think those are necessary in any creative department's mission statement because you want to do things well. And so if that is codified, it gives you that backstop to approach someone who is maybe not skilled enough just yet, or someone that has created something and you're like, well, you did work on this, but just because you created it doesn't necessarily mean we need to platform it. And now it's not you versus that person, but again, it's both of you working within the boundaries of the ministry's mission statement.
That's right. And I hope at this point in this episode, we're talking a lot about creative teams and specifically to examples that relate to creative teams. Of course, because this was sparked by a conversation you were having with creatives. But I hope for anyone listening to this episode in particular right now, they're noticing, regardless of what ministry you belong to, you volunteer in, you are on staff in, you want to join, each one of our ministries in church, whether it's kids or youth or the teaching team or creative or worship, it would benefit you to take some time, maybe this week or in the future, the near future, to write out a ministry mission here for your ministry. I'm thinking about kids in particular, because the global mission of what kids leaders do in their ministry compared to the other ministries, it's all shared. It's the church's mission. But practically, the way that you embody that ministry when you're speaking to children is so much different than even youth and certainly adults. And so having specific ministry missions that serve as policy for how you make decisions in that ministry will end up serving your collective body, your entire church so well.
So right away, you can go to emergency mode, whatever conflict that you're dealing with. You're creating a graphic for, summer camp, and someone's like, well, actually X, Y, and Z. Okay, put in the church's mission. Let's have a conversation. What you should also start doing right away is finalizing or creating for the first time, if you don't yet have one, a ministry-specific mission for the creative team. And what I love about this approach is it works for any size church. If you are a smaller church, an everyday church with like one person and you have like one other person that you're working with, or it's you, but you're dealing with the senior leader, great. Create the ministry mission statement and start doing it just between you and the senior leader. If you are a giant church and you're dealing with dozens of creatives and you don't yet have this, and I got a DM separately, this is not an Estonian DM, this is presumably an American DM, yesterday from a guy, and he said, I am from a large and well-known church. And I said, okay, I'm not gonna ask. And he's like, I keep trying to do things, and I have a heart for design. But sometimes the main branch will send me graphics that they say to push, but they are an atrocity. And I said to this guy, I said, okay, like what's the policy and or what is like the infrastructure that exists that allows for the main department to say, like, you have to press this, you have to push this. And he's like, well, I don't know. They just tell me what to do. And I just try to do it. And that's why I'm writing you, because I don't want to do it anymore. I'm like, okay, The bigger issue is not the fact that, and he showed me the graphic was poorly designed. Like, it's not the graphic. The bigger issue is there's no infrastructure here whatsoever. And I told him, I was like, that's a huge red flag in a church of your size. It's totally a thing that you can get by with in a smaller ministry because you're dealing with like one other person. And if you have good rapport with them, if you have good social equity, you can get by without actual mission because you can just work on conflict resolution together. We saw this with our own team. As it grew, we could no longer do interpersonal conflict resolution at scale because it was just too many things that was becoming this bottleneck for what we created. So the infrastructure needs to exist there. Small church, large church. What you should start installing right away is the mission statement for your creative ministry. Take what we have here, copy it, rejigger it, put in contextual stuff that's unique to you, and then we can get to the actual advanced mode, AKA the ideal mode, because we will hit the limitations of just a singular ministry mission statement. How? Well, let's say you talk about excellence and authenticity. Okay, Alex's definition of excellence is this.
Sure.
My definition of excellence is that. Well, we both are approaching it in the same way, but our personal preference is now kind of like masquerading as excellence. What do we do? Advanced mode. This is where we get into actual ministry policy, not a singular statement, but a singular statement that is then governed by a series of policy values or policy statements. We have 9 here that I wrote down. These 9 I use. You can copy and steal them. And there's 3 categories for the 9 statements. So we have 3 dedicated to team, we have 3 dedicated to the ministry, and we have 3 dedicated to projects. So the 3 dedicated to projects are how Alex and I would figure out like what is excellence, what is authenticity. The 3 dedicated to ministry are why does this ministry exist? What are you trying to do? And the 3 dedicated to team are like rules for how we work with each other. You all understood?
Yeah, we're on board. We've got a trio of triplets.
Look, a guiding principle broken up into a neat pattern.
Who would have thought?
Let's start with number 1. The first of 3 team policy values. Solutions first. Solutions first. This was one that I shared with the table in Estonia. I said, here's a policy value you could set up right away after you kind of work through this emergency issue. Solutions first. Because the heart of what they were saying was like, this guy is just always critical. He loves to poke holes. He loves to say what's wrong. And then he has no desire from their vantage point to contribute or to present solutions. He's more like, I'm just the guy that points out what's wrong. We outlawed that type of guy in our company a long time ago. Said, you're not allowed to be that guy. If you have a keen eye for what's wrong without a keen eye for how to help, that's not a thing. Anyone can point at a car that's broken down and say, you can't park there. But what can we do to solve the problem?
And that personality trait or even that skill can be an asset. A
100%.
Keen eye to be critical of things that other people wouldn't see or wouldn't notice. But that's the absolute kind of hinge pin of this thing, which is like, yes, you can be critical. And the best way to be critical is to identify the thing that deserves to be criticized. And when you come to the table, have a proposed solution first.
Let's use an example. We were in Lithuania. And the day we arrived in Lithuania, in the capital of Vilnius, was the day that 5,000 German battalions, 5,000 German infantry, that'd be a lot of people, a lot of battalions, showed up in Lithuania as an act of, hey, we're here, and they were just permanently setting up, and we know there's a war happening really close, and we know that you are like minutes from a border with Belarus that may not be friendly or actually Belarus, so we are here. And it was an interesting day to arrive.
No doubt.
Because we rolled up and I went to go take a picture of a church and there was a giant tank in front of it. And everyone was taking pictures with the tank.
Yeah.
And all the Germans were like smiling and taking pictures with the locals. And you could look at like, they were all wearing the same army outfit. But depending on the flag on their shoulder, you could see, oh, they're from Germany or they're local to Lithuania. One of the byproducts of this demonstration was that in the small, compact, old town of Vilnius, almost all the roads have been shut down. So there was one road in or out. And it was a colossal thunderstorm. So our Uber driver couldn't get to us when we had to leave to go to the airport to catch a flight. And we went on 7 flights in 10 days on this trip. So breakneck pace. But I had become accustomed with traveling in the Schengen area. The great thing about the Schengen area, which is like this collection of European countries, is that they will not even check your ID when going to the airport. It is a very strange experience if you are from North America. You will roll up to the airport, you will scan your boarding pass, they'll say, that's probably yours. You will then clear security and get on the plane.
Love it.
That's it. You don't have to get up to the airport very early to make this work. So I'm looking at like the Uber app and like the time is starting to tick up because like he can't, he's going down a street and I'm like, no, you can't go down that street. It's closed today. He probably knows that. No, get stuck, has to U-turn. And I'm like, at a certain point I just DM him. I go, hey, like we'll just come to you. And he's like, okay, like you're pretty close. Torrential downpour. So I throw up my hood on my rain jacket. We cover all of our gear and we walk through. And it is like, it's like the equivalent of when you're driving on the highway and it's storming so much that people pull over. Right. They're like, well, I can't drive in this. Yeah. People were like huddled underneath awnings and me and Pastor Justin are out there
trudging through.
Yes, exactly. Soaked. We find him, we get in the car, he turns around and we're in one lane, tiny lane traffic. And we sit there for 10 minutes and we don't move 1 inch. And all the apps are like, oh, don't worry, you're like 20 minutes away. And then you've sat there for 15 minutes and they say you're 20 minutes away. So I say to the guy and I say, hey, we're gonna pay you, but we have to get out and we're gonna walk again past all this traffic to the actual main road and we'll get on another Uber. This man then reveals to us that he speaks not a single word of English. He's a Ukrainian refugee and he only speaks Ukrainian. So we're using Google Translate, which was the first time in all the Baltics that we did this because everyone speaks English. So this was new. And he basically just says, give me 3 minutes. He starts on this one way by just passing everyone on the sidewalk. Everyone's giving us dirty looks. He then reaches the intersection and basically implies that he's gonna actually start driving against the cars on the other one way.
This is my kind of guy, yeah.
And
Justin's loving this, I know it.
And he says to Justin, you need to get out of the car because there's a street sign here that you need to pick up and move. Otherwise, I cannot turn left. Yeah. So Justin gets out of the car and just heaves this giant street sign in a cement block out of the way that was temporarily erected. Like he did not rip it on the sidewalk so that we can start going down the one way. At this point, the cars are like, wait a minute, what are you doing? A 10-minute procession of up one ways, down one ways. You would get to a place where there were no cars, which you would think is a good sign, but it just means that like one of these roads are closed. You hit a road that's closed. This man proceeds to go through the most insane a series and assortment of miracles and gets us out of the old town in time. We get to the airport. I gave him like €100 tip. One, because I was like, man, good for you, like starting a new life. Like, but also like,
that was heroic.
You allowed us to stay in your car and get to the airport faster and avoid going out into the torrential downpour once again. I tell that story for this reason. I'm in the back seat saying multiple times, let us out of the car. Because I'm trying to make like a choice with our back up against the wall. Right. Because like we have to get to the airport. It was nighttime. Like this is the flight to get on. And he said, you know, a lot of people would let you out of this car. But I see a solution. And I tell you, we couldn't move that sign the first couple times. I was like, what does this guy think he's doing? And he won't allow me out of this car. Like he won't listen because he is so intently focused. Like he had a vision in his mind that I did not have.
Wow.
So praise God for him. Second value here is saying the quiet part out loud. We value speaking plainly. If you've listened to this show for any length of time, you've probably heard us talk about this value. It has been immensely helpful in working with other creatives, especially Canadian creatives. One thing I learned about the Baltics.
Just suffer in silence.
They speak their mind.
Right.
We, not so much. One of the locals told us that if you smile at someone on the street, they'll just assume that they know you because that's the only time we smile.
It's like no pleasantries.
So they will just like spend the next 48 hours being like, did I meet them at like my boss's? So like you think you're being friendly, but you have caused them existential crisis. When we landed in Estonia, we get in our Uber driver and Pastor Justin in his friendly way goes, this is our first time in Estonia. The Uber driver does not skip a beat. He says, so? That was like his dry humor of being like, we were like, okay, that is not us.
Yeah.
Say the quiet part out loud. Number 3 of our team specific values, yes, be yes, and no, be no. It is important to build and then guard trust that you have within the team. And this is something we see with creatives, especially people that are like true creatives. They are talented, they are skilled, they are disorganized.
Yeah.
And what happens is you can't trust them to be reliable to come through because they're like, well, actually, you know, inspiration just hadn't struck, or I was you know, and that is something that can tear teams apart because you count on someone to come through, they don't come through, even when they said they would.
Yeah.
So this is an important value, I think, specifically for church creative teams, because there are other teams, maybe kids ministry, maybe admin, that are like, yeah, we're all very organized. That's almost never true. It might be the least true of creative teams. Yes, be yes, no, be no. Any notes to add before we move to the ministry values?
That's it.
You're just going to let me tell stories about the Baltics. I'm going to take up all the talking time.
We'll see what else comes up here.
Ministry specific values. First, calculated delusion. Push hard, stop short of reckless. Churches don't have resources. We don't have what businesses have. We can look at what's available to us and say, woe is me. I guess we'll never be able to do this. Here's the truth I've learned about working in church plants and working in mega churches. You never have what you want.
That's right.
Your budget is always smaller than an organization of the same size that's for profit. So you just have bigger dreams that you can't reach, let's say, in a mega church versus like your smaller dreams that are also out of reach at a startup church. Calculated delusion and this belief of like, I don't care what you say, this is possible, we'll make a way. If you can set that standard, because that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to set standards to avoid chaos. If you can set that standard in your ministry, you can basically take that spirit, imbue it into the people that you're working alongside, and now everyone's working as problem solvers with like belief that irrespective of the roadblocks, whether they are actually street signs in concrete or not, we can get past them. Creative curveballs. This is the second one for ministry. Disrupting routine to prevent staleness. I believe so much in like no weeks off and sticking to a system, but recognizing that the church rhythm is routine-based. And that's what makes church so life-giving. Every Sunday, we show up and we join in this shared purpose of worshiping God. What's the downside of routine? It can become stale. And so in the creative space, introducing creative curveballs, instead of just throwing 102 gas fastballs down the, doesn't matter how great your fastball is. If that's all you throw, people are going to start sitting on it and swinging for the fences.
That's right. Yeah.
You have to have a curveball, an off-speed option, something to prevent staleness and introduce disruption into your routine.
Let me interrupt you for a moment.
Thank goodness.
We're about halfway through these 9 values here, and I'm not sure if any of the listeners have picked it up already, but you can see like they're very, the way you've laid them out, they're very plainly said, and you could copy paste these onto just about any organization, not just church, but any organization, and they could work. But in the context of church ministry, I don't think it's hard to see that a lot of these, if not all of them, are actually rooted in the wisdom of Scripture, which is what also helps marry these values to your more grand mission as a church and like what we're trying to do here. These are almost all, they're not explicitly, we're not attaching verses and chapters to each of these, but it's not hard to see how these are all anchored in the value system of the greatest story ever told that we're all trying to chase after here. And that's as a pastor and as a person who works in church, that's what really resonates to me here is like, oh, these are new values that we're suggesting you install, but they are all anchored in values that we already agree on, whether it's, letting your yes be your yes and your no be your no, like telling the truth.
I came up with that.
Right. I've heard someone else say that before, but maybe it was you.
Sure.
Even calculated delusion, that's what inspired this thought for me is like, the story of Jesus is that like we literally believe in impossible things and we don't just limit ourselves to what we can see or what we think we can do on our own. So that's a whole new layer of value to each of these 9 here that, these are rooted in eternal truths that we're formed by belonging to the story of Jesus, and to embody them through our work. That's just, it's so cohesive to me. And like I said, if you're creative and you're going to bring this to the table to your team and say, hey, I listen to this podcast and I want to install these new things. They're not really new ideas in the historical sense. They're old ideas. They're tried and true ideas. Maybe just new for your church.
And I have condensed the description of each of these values for this show, but in the full versions, they are all anchored to a specific scripture passage.
That's true.
All right, final of the 3 ministry-specific values, protect what is sacred. This means cultivating your God-given gifts. It also means upholding the church's purpose, mission, vision, and values. Protect what is sacred. It's easy in ministry to have infighting because you're working closely with others and interpersonal conflict inevitably arises. This value of protecting what's sacred holds everyone accountable for not allowing the bickering between Alex and I to negatively impact the church as a whole or what God put into Alex's heart and into my heart. And this is important when you pair your passion with like consistent output.
Yeah.
It's like I had such a bright, burning passion for photography in church, and now I am burnt out and it is dead. So like understanding that we all have a responsibility to protect our God-given gifts in ourselves, but also to protect what's sacred in others. All right, let's get to project specific. Okay, first, the delight is in the details. This is, of course, a remix on The Devil is in the Details, my belief is that it's sometimes the smallest thing, the kerning of a font, the amount of negative space. There have been 175 times where I have sat or stood almost always over someone's shoulder in this office and I've said, this is wrong. And what we have done is interrogate whatever we're looking at and realize it was this small tweak, this tiny little adjustment, the delight is in the details, that brought the whole project together.
That's right.
Celebrating craftsmanship, I think, is worth doing. And that's what we mean when we say the delight is in the details. You go and you see someone at the top of their game and you can just look at like, oh, if it's like a piece of clothing, like the fabric choices and the way things are woven together. Or if you sit down at a great meal, you can realize like the effort that was put into like the width of the tomato as it was sliced and taking the tomato off the vine at a spit. Like you could have just taken the tomato anytime. You just gotten, I just cut it. It was 3/4 inch instead of half an inch. No, it needs to be half. All of these little things. The delight is in the details. Don't let them be viewed as a negative thing, because what will happen is when you harp on these little tiny things, you can get the reputation. Maybe I'm speaking, firsthand from this. It's like, like nothing's ever good enough. It's always like this tiny little thing. He's obsessed with, no. That's the whole point. The delight is in the details. Something comes together because extra attention and effort was paid to the small things that other people overlooked. Second, savor the small. Any task, same effort. Savor the small. It doesn't matter what you've been put in charge of right now. It doesn't matter what you have to do right now. Here's a spoiler. At the top, I run an organization. I lead dozens of people below me. Guess what? Most of the time I do things that suck now. When it was just me, I did things that sucked, but I also got to do a lot of fun stuff. Now it's like, this tax form needs to be filled out. This budget needs to be balanced. Spending has kind of creeped up in ways that were not originally planned for over here. This person is having a problem with this person. Savor the small. Any task, same effort.
All right, let's bring it home.
Make it great and make it us. This is the personified, personalized version of excellence and authenticity. You want something to be done with excellence. I want to make it great, but I also need to make it us. And this is like the final boss, I would say, of church creativity. Because when we copy others and what they're doing, a lot of the times we can create our own version, a carbon copy that is just as exceptional in terms of craft. But it may be so foreign to our church's culture and identity. And so whenever we're evaluating a creative project or what we're doing, we have to say, if we're going to do it, we're going to make it great. But we have to make it us. And if it's not us, we're just not going to do it. I talked about this in Estonia in the context of fashion, because people were asking, like, is it okay to copy church trends? That was one of the questions. And I said, it's absolutely okay to copy church trends, so long as it aligns and intersects with your church's mission and identity. It's like we all wear denim. Every one of us, every generation, young and old. But you can tell by the cut and the shape and the color and the wash of denim, usually what age group a person is from. And if you, of a certain age group, wear a certain type of denim, it can look very strange. Isn't that curious? Why? Because it's not you and it doesn't feel like you. Make it great, make it us. Any thoughts on our 9 values?
Yeah, so for a brief moment, will you speak to the person, the creative ministry leader or creative ministry member who's listening to the show, and they're listening, they're like, okay, yeah, Braid, like I'm on board all the way. I want to bring this to my team. How does that person most effectively bring this idea to their team to ensure that everyone is on board with all of these ideas? Because it's one thing to bring this to your team and say, hey, I got these new 9 policy values. We're going to install them. And you can install them by doing whatever, putting them up on the wall behind the soundboard or sharing them in a Google Doc, and you could consider them installed. But if everyone isn't on board, it's not going to serve anyone very well. So for someone who's like, yes, I want to do this, what is the most effective next step for them to take in bringing this idea to a team, of whether it's a team of 2 or a team of 20?
First thing to do is to understand time and place for when to introduce these. If you are in the midst of a power struggle, if you are in the midst of coming off the heels of a particularly tension-filled season or project, wait. It's like with parenting. Okay, I have a response and a reaction I want to make right now. I am not going to sit down with my child and talk about their issue until both of us have clear heads and we've settled down. And now we can approach it in a sober mind. Same is true for here. So wait for a time when everyone is sober-minded and things are not kind of ratcheted up really high. if you're not in that place right yet, you don't have to just wait. Remember, emergency mode,
Yes.
basic mode. The second thing is these are all written in ways that like nobody's going to look at these and be frustrated by them. The whole point of a value is not to make a controversial stance.
Right.
And then here's the third part. These are problem solvers, but you, the leader, are held accountable to them just as much, if not more so, than everybody else. And so the warning I'll issue is that values are great on day one where they're installed. They're really frustrating on day 45 when you have to say the quiet part out loud to the person that you don't want to.
That's right.
Or you have to have your yes be yes and realize that just because I'm the leader doesn't mean I get to live by different rules. The rules only work when everyone's held accountable by the mission and vision and values. So yes, this is a silver bullet in many ways, but like you have to live up to the values yourself, which is the part that can be tricky and irritating.
Yeah, that's right.
One more little quick story from the Baltics on the delight is in the details. And I saved this for last because it doesn't have anything to do with anything in this episode, but it is a fascinating story nonetheless. So we arrive in Vilnius. It's our second of 3 Baltic capitals. We went to Riga, Latvia first. We went to Vilnius second. We went to Tallinn third. And I had a great time in the Baltics. We had beautiful weather. When you're only in a city for like 48 hours, weather really does make a difference because it'll have a lasting impression in your mind of like, oh yeah, it rained when we were there. That place sucks. That's not really fair.
Yeah.
We had great weather. These places are so clean. There's not many tourists there. So they're like roomy. The food is great. And the old town, all of the medieval buildings are just so wonderful. And the atmosphere you're in is great.
Yeah.
So we arrive in Lithuania and we're a little bit late. We drove from Latvia to Lithuania. It was like 4 hours. And so I start working on some footage right away. We have about 2 hours till dinner. And I send Pastor Justin to go and do the droning. So he's going to go drone and I'm going to work on the footage. We'll finish at the same time. We'll go to dinner. And so I wanted to film the Vilnius Cathedral, which was kind of their big Roman architecture, Greek architecture cathedral, which is really cool. We get there and like a couple buildings, it's all papered off. They're doing refurbishments. The locals would say to us later, why are we doing these refurbishments the 3 months where everybody comes to see us?
Right.
Anyway, so I realized, okay, we can't film this. So Justin's like, it's all right. I'll take the drone. I'll find another church area to film and I'll get back to you. I'm going to read the text that I got from Pastor Justin. Shortly after, actually not so shortly after, it had been a little while, he had been filming and he sends me the following text. I might be in trouble. Lady is making me wait. Hope it's fine. I was just finishing up. Droning. I was just finishing up.
It's concerning.
Wait in what way? Palace. They are sending military police to me. Maybe. I say, share your location with me. Here's what happened. Pastor Justin was temporarily detained by the Lithuanian military police. Why, you might ask? Were we droning illegally and or recklessly? No. License, insurance, height, everything was above board. When I prep a drone trip, I always check a trio of maps to see where is filming allowed. DJI has a pretty good standard these days because they've worked with all the government agencies.
Yeah. If
If you're not allowed to fly, they won't let you. Like, you're just not going to take off this drone. Take it off, it's fine. What we found out was that the presidential palace was unmarked on all of these drone maps. As we were shown, if I had tracked down the local Lithuanian drone map, you could see that the presidential palace was marked as a no-fly zone. What was also true is that unlike in most countries we visit, they didn't have those signs that are just like a picture of a drone with an X through it. There was nothing like that. So Justin was held inside of the presidential palace for several hours. We missed our dinner reservations. At a certain point, he just starts texting me like, hey, they're taking my passport. I only have a photo
That's
of
the text
it.
you don't want to get.
So I'm like, okay. I walk down and I'm just like chilling outside the palace. People are on the grass in front of the palace. Everyone's having like, their picnics and their dinners. Everyone's having a great time. The sun is shining.
Fly over the palace.
As I start like walking up, Justin with 2 heavily armored guards comes out and they start like talking at this like military truck. They don't know who I am.
Right.
So I'm just standing there with my Fuji, like, oh wow, love this picture, like listening, eavesdropping into their conversation. What eventually happened was They said, we're just going to take your drone and we're going to investigate it for 3 to 6 months.
And you live here now. So.
And you can go. Because I was like, okay, they're just going to say like, don't do this again.
Sure.
Maybe there's a fine. I was like, fine, like it's all going to be fine. You know, I've gone on enough trips like this. Like I feel like 5 years ago, I would have been like having a panic attack.
Yeah.
And I was just sitting there and I was like, this is going to be a good story.
Yeah.
And so, but Pastor Justin, in his non-Lithuanian speaking ability, managed to do was negotiate, we keep the drone and you take the micro SD.
Okay, so they got the footage.
They got
all
the
of
footage.
their military secrets are safe.
We got the pastor, we got the drone. And they said to us, they're like, yeah, you can fly here. You just can't fly over the palace. I was like, okay, fine. An hour later, the courtyard to the presidential palace was open for the public. We went inside, and from the ground, we're taking photos. I'm going to describe the presidential palace to you now. It's not so much a single building as it is a perimeter. The building is in a square, like a perimeter. 90% of the real estate is a courtyard in the middle,
Right.
which they then let us into to take photos.
What's on the roof?
What's on the roof of this tiny little perimeter?
You'll never know.
Those are the secrets that Justin has in his mind's eye.
Yes.
But they're only, look, again, I'm empathetic. You're very close to a foreign power that has not been so nice to you and is in the middle.
Yeah, there's some tension.
I get it. And the Lithuanian people were all in all very kind. And of all the food we ate, Lithuanian food probably was the standout.
Okay, what's on the menu?
Okay, so Mennonite background for me. That means that my ancestors came from like modern day Ukraine.
Yeah.
So like not exactly the Baltics, but like pretty close.
Close enough. Closer than me.
Right. So their famous soup is called cold beetroot soup.
Love it.
So it is obviously a cold soup. It's going to be beets blended with kefir. There's like a single egg in there. They'll take cucumbers and like shred them into strands. And this is all served in like this brilliant magenta dish with potatoes on the side. Unreal. They then have like garlic fry bread that you dip in a cheese sauce.
No one's mad about that.
And then the standout. I want you to think of pierogies. I think the Lithuanians have a better alternative to pierogies.
Wow.
They basically take an entire potato, stuff it with meat somehow, and then serve it to you alongside a bunch of bacon and sour cream. The texture of the potato is almost like spongy. We've all had potatoes in 100 different ways. I've never had a potato served like this.
I wonder if it's the variety.
I also don't know how they stuffed the meat in it because like it comes as a whole
closed?
potato. Yeah. And you cut in. It's like beef Wellington, but potato on the outside with beef on
And
the inside.
it's beef on the inside?
Yeah. Or it's probably pork actually, now that I say that. So yeah, great food there. We survived. We got a lot of great footage. We arrived back. We learned a lot. We turned it into a podcast. We'll be back next Wednesday, of course. Thank you for your time, attention, and trust. We'll talk to you then. How do we feel about Ferrari's performance this weekend?
Even watching qualifying was just like, that was amazing. We didn't watch the race because we're at church.
Yeah.
But
Well,
watching
also, who
qualifying-
cares?
Yeah.
Like the qualifying was
Yeah,
like
so much fun.
we were on the plane and I was like begging for it not to take off because we were leaving from Poland. So it was 10 hours with no Wi-Fi. Leclerc goes fastest. I because there was like 2 seconds left. I lean over and I'm like, yes! And then Lando crosses fastest and I was like, this is just like
And
devastation.
sets a track
Yeah.
record.